Could the rise of AI lead to a 3.5 day work week? One of the biggest names in finance thinks it's a possibility. Welcome back to the AI Breakdown Brief, all the AI headline news you need in around 5 minutes. Now, when it comes to artificial intelligence, there is obviously a lot of anxiety around what it's going to mean for the future of jobs. Many people are concerned that their job skills might be totally automated away, forcing a pretty fundamental rethink of their careers. But the flip side, and proponents of the technology, argue that the increases in human productivity could lead to a flourishing of human society in which people just don't have to work as much as they once did. Count among that camp, apparently, JP Morgan CEO Jamie Dimon. In a recent interview with Bloomberg, he said that even though AI is likely to, yes, eliminate some jobs, there are going to be amazing benefits as well. Dimon said, "Your children are going to live to 100 and not have cancer because of technology. And literally, they'll probably be working 3.5 days a week." Now, putting his money where his mouth is, JP Morgan has apparently advertised for some 3,500 related roles earlier this year around artificial intelligence and had an entire section in his shareholder letter this year dedicated to AI. He claimed that the company already had more than 300 use cases in production. Now, in terms of what he's concerned about, Dimon said, quote, "The biggest negative in my view is AI being used by bad people to do bad things." Now, of course, if we take this optimistic look at AI increasing productivity, a reasonable skepticism is the fact that with previous productivity enhances, we didn't necessarily get dramatic decreases in how much people worked. Instead, we saw people just fill in that time, and if anything, the boundaries between work and not work have gotten blurrier. Point being that yes, AI might increase productivity, but ultimately, what we do with those gains is going to have to come from a societal conversation around an updated social contract. Just because we can work 3.5 day work weeks doesn't mean that that will be the norm, unless society comes together en masse and decides that's going to be the norm. Now, growing experiments with a 4-day work week currently suggest that maybe it's less unrealistic than it seems, but the point, I guess, is that I don't think it's just a question about AI alone. Moving to our next topic, AI came up as part of a set of conversations around a Google antitrust hearing. Yesterday, Microsoft CEO Satya Nadella was on the witness stand in that antitrust case against Google, and basically Nadella reinforced the Justice Department's argument that a big part of Google's dominance with search was through agreements with companies like Apple that made Google search engine the default on the Safari web browser. He used the phrase vicious cycle to describe the fact that Google takes advantage of its roughly 90% market share to allow it to improve search results more quickly and more efficiently than anyone else, which of course reinforces its monopoly in the space. Indeed, he argued that Silicon Valley sees internet search as an area that is just completely unwinnable, whereas in just about every other field, investors and entrepreneurs think that they can take a crack at even the biggest giants. That's one where that's just not the case. And most relevantly for this show, Nadella said that there were serious limits to how much the rise of AI could actually reshape that market. He said, quote, "The distribution advantage Google has today doesn't go away. In fact, if anything, I worry a lot that, even in spite of my enthusiasm that there is a new angle with AI, this vicious cycle that I'm trapped in could become even more vicious because the defaults get reinforced." Indeed, he even suggested that he might have been overly enthusiastic about ChatGPT's potential to break the cycle with Google. He said, "Yeah, I mean, look, that's called exuberance of someone who has like 3% share, that maybe I'll have 3.5% share." Now, as the Wall Street Journal pointed out, despite adding AI features to Bing, Microsoft's share of the search market has basically not budged. So 3 interesting takeaways here. 1, the Microsoft CEO walking back some of his enthusiasm around how much AI could disrupt existing monopolies. 2, some new arguments in the question of how much existing distribution moats are going to influence who wins in the AI space. And 3, this is an interesting window into the state of competition among the big tech giants. Speaking of which, this is something that I think we'll get into more later this week, but The Information wrote a really interesting piece called Meta OpenAI Square Off Over Open Source AI. The new reporting basically says here that in a lot of these meetings that have recently happened between the big tech companies and policymakers, one of the central points of contention and one of the biggest arguments among those representing the big tech space is around the question of open source models. You might see a chart floating around the internet that's called Friends and Foes of Open Source AI, using a red light, yellow light, green light heuristic to explain where different companies are. Anthropic and OpenAI both being red lights when it comes to open source AI, Microsoft and Google being somewhere in the middle, with Meta and Databricks being very pro open source AI. As The Information argues, the Llama 2 launch has forced the industry and regulators to take positions. BetaWorks founder John Borthwick basically said that until Llama 2, many people felt that open source LLMs were 2 to 4 years behind closed models, but the most recent releases show that that just wasn't the case. Now, in many ways, all of this reverts back to questions of licensure and where policymakers are going to draw the line on too powerful or not. But I'm presenting it here as another example of how this competitive accelerationist conversation is evolving and where it's likely to lead in terms of policy. Meanwhile, companies in other industries remain focused on rejiggering themselves for the AI era. One example of that, Visa yesterday launched a $100 million generative AI ventures initiative. It's basically a dedicated AI fund that will sit under Visa Ventures. Now, Visa tends to be a very tech-forward company when it comes to the financial sector, having been some of the most active in the crypto and Web3 space, and so I don't think it's at all surprising to see this sort of dedicated focus to generative AI either. Speaking of venture funding, last week we told you about OpenAI being in conversations to raise a little bit of money at an $80 billion to $90 billion valuation. That investment round, if it came to pass, would primarily involve employees being able to sell shares that they already owned. Well, now another reported fundraising in the works comes from Character AI, and they are out seeking a $5 billion plus valuation as well. Now, one of the reasons that they may be fundraising now is sort of a strike while the iron's hot idea, given that Meta just announced a set of AI personalities that don't seem very dissimilar from Character AI's main offering. Writes Payments.com, Character AI offers a service that enables users to create chatbots capable of engaging in text conversations. For example, users have already sent millions of messages to characters like Super Mario based on the Nintendo 64 character and received AI-generated responses. The company's previous funding round valued it at $1 billion, and this updated round could value it at up to $10 billion, although it seems like $5 billion to $6 billion is more likely. I keep seeing statistics that show a ton of growth in usage of Character AI, but I'm still waiting for a better explanation of who's actually using it. As I've said before on the show, I think it's entirely possible that I am just out of tune with an entire generational cohort of users, but it would seem to me that if Character AI is getting the usage that it seems like it is, it's going to be largely driven by younger users. Then again, that is where Silicon Valley has typically looked for new social startups to have their first inroads. Anyways, friends, an exciting world as always. So many more things brewing every day in artificial intelligence. I appreciate you listening or watching, and I'll be back soon with the main AI breakdown.